Good day, I'm Charles Kevin M. Sultan. Today, magkakaroon tayo ng pen and paper problem solving about accounting cycle, journalizing without chart of account. Simple lang gagawin natin. Meron na tayo ditong problem na sasagutan natin o i-analyze. And meron na din tayong financial worksheet na makakatulong sa ating pagsasagot sa ating problem. Simula na tayo. Basahin muna natin ating problem. The April 2020 transactions of Budget Driving Institute owned and managed by Crispin Rosales are listed below. First transaction, April 2. Rosales invested 250,000 cash and 15,000 furnitures and fixtures. Bago natin i-journalize yung ating first transaction, magbe-base muna tayo lagi sa ating financial worksheet. Noong April 2 daw, there's an increase in asset, particularly in cash and furnitures and fixtures. No effect naman sa liability. And there's an increase in equity, particularly in Rosales capital. Kaya, debit natin ang cash amounting to 250,000. Debit din natin ang furniture and fixtures amounting to 15,000. Credit naman natin Rosales Capital amounting to 265,000. Bakit naging 265,000? Simple lang, pinag-add lang natin yung cash na 250,000 and furniture and fixtures na 15,000, which is equal to 265,000. Explanation natin sa ating first transaction, investment of owner. Sa pag-explanation ng ating every transaction, pwede din kayong kumuha sa ating mismong problem o nasa sa inyo rin kung paano nyo gagawa ng explanation ng every transaction. Okay, next transaction na tayo. No April 4, 2 second-hand cars were purchased and the 50,000 down payment of 150,000 was made. Issued a promissory note for the balance. So, no April 4, there's an increase in asset, particularly in cars, and there's a decrease in asset, particularly in cash. And there's a increase in liabilities, particularly notes payable, no effect naman sa equity. Kaya, debit natin ang cars amounting to 150,000. Credit naman natin ang cash amounting to 775,000. And notes payable na nagkakahalaga rin na 75,000. Bakit tayo nagkaroon ng notes payable na 75,000? Kasi, nung April 4, 50% lang nung 150,000 ang binayaran niya at nag-issue siya ng promissory note for the remaining balance. Explanation natin, purchase 2 second-hand cars. Third transaction na tayo. April 5, bought office equipment for cash amounting to 12,000. So, nung April 5, there's an increase in asset, particularly in office equipment, and there's a decrease in asset, particularly in cash. And no effect naman sa liability at equity. Kaya, debit office equipment amounting to 12,000. And credit cash amounting to 12,000 also. Explanation natin, bought office equipment Next transaction tayo. April 6. Two students drivers filled up an application form stating among others that they were willing to pay 2,000 each for a 1-week lesson. Dito sa ating ika-4 na transaction, wala tayo ditong entry kasi nag-fill up lang sila ng application para sa ating budget driving. Next transaction na tayo. April 7. Paid 2,000 for gas and oil. April 7, there's a decrease in asset, particularly in cash, no effects sa liability, and there's a decrease in equity, particularly in gas and oil expense. Sa equity, nakapaloob dito ang income tsaka expense, kaya kaya nag-decrease ang equity. So, debit gas and oil expense. Amounting to 2,000. And credit cash. Amounting to 2,000. Also, an explanation payment for gas and oil. Next transaction. April 8. Paid 10,000 for an advertisement that was posted along the highway to promote the business. So, noong April 8, there's a decrease in asset, particularly in cash, and no effect sa liability, and there's a decrease also in equity, particularly advertising expense. Kaya, debit advertising expense. Amounting to 10,000. And credit cash amounting to 10,000 also. And explanation payment for advertisement. Next transaction na tayo. The two students drivers paid in full. So, on April 11, there's an increase in asset, particularly in cash, and no effect sa liability, and there's a increase also in equity, particularly in driving fees revenue. Kaya, debit cash amounting to 4,000 and credit driving fees revenue. Amounting to 4,000 also. And explanation, student drivers payment. Next transaction. Ayusin ko lang po ah. Okay, our next transaction, April 14. Another two student drivers were billed for 4,000 but only paid in cash. So, nung April 14, there's an increase in asset, particularly in cash and accounts receivable, and no effect naman sa liability, and there's an increase also in equity, particularly in driving fees revenues. Kaya, debit natin ng cash amounting to 2,000. And debit din natin ang accounts receivable amounting to 2,000 also, and credit naman driving fees revenue. Nagkakahalagang 4,000. And explanation, billed per service rendered. Next transaction. April 15. Salaries were paid for the first half of April amounting to 4,500. So, noong April 15, there's a decrease on asset, particularly in cash. No effect naman sa liability, and there's a decrease also in equity, particularly in salaries expense. Kaya, debit natin ang salaries expense amounting to 4,500. And credit naman cash amounting to 4,500 also. And with an explanation of payment for salaries. Next transaction. April 19. Ms. Rosales made a cash withdrawal of 1,500. So, noong April 19, there's a decrease on asset, particularly in cash, and there's a no effect on liability, and there's a decrease on equity, particularly in Rosales withdrawal. Kaya, debit natin Rosales withdrawal or drawing amounting to 1,500, and credit cash amounting to 1,500 also. And explanation, owners withdrawal. Next transaction na tayo, malapit na tayo matapos. April 20, driving fees of 7,000 were billed to various clients but only 50% was collected. So, no April 20, there's an increase on asset, particularly in cash and accounts receivable, and no effect naman sa liability, and there's a decrease on equity, particularly in driving fees revenues. Kaya, debit natin ang cash amounting to 3,500, and debit also accounts receivable amounting to 3,500 also, and credit driving fees revenue amounting to 7,000. Explanation, billed to various clients. Next transaction na tayo. April 26, lessor, owner of building, sent a bill for office rent due 7,500. So, nung April 26, there's a no effect on asset and increase on liability, particularly rent payable, and there's a decrease on equity, particularly in rent expense. Kaya, debit rent expense amounting to 7,500. And credit rent payable amounting to 7,500 also. And explanation natin, bill for office rent. Second to the last transaction, April 27. Utility bills paid in cash amounting to 4,500. So, noong April 27, there's a decrease in asset, particularly in cash, and no effect sa liability, and decrease sa equity, particularly in utilities expense. So, noong April 27, i-debit natin ang utilities expense amounting to 4,500. And credit cash amounting to 4,500 also. Explanation, payment for utilities. Last transaction na tayo. April 30. Salaries were paid for the second half of April. So, noong April 30, there's a decrease in asset, particularly in cash, no effect sa liability, and there's a decrease in equity, particularly in salaries expense. Kaya, debit natin ang salaries expense amounting to 4,500. And credit cash amounting to 4,500 also. Explanation, payment for salaries. Tapos na tayo. Sana naintindihan nyo ang aking pagsasagot sa every transaction. Salamat!